not more shady. On behalf of the family, I would like to thank everybody that came out this morning. This is a nice crowd, given the fact that the obituary only made it to the paper this morning. I know that there was a lot of online stuff done by the family to try to get the word out, but this is a very nice turnout, and I'm sure that there will be more when we get to the funeral home in a little while and have our reception. I want to begin by simply saying that the reason for our being here today is to celebrate the life of Frank Kennedy. But I know that many of us came here today still focused on the tragedy of the last several weeks. It's just inevitable that all of us came here this morning with that on our mind. Today, I want to encourage each of us to focus on the life and the person of Frank Kennedy as we all knew him, except we all knew him differently. He was a son, he was a son-in-law, he was a brother, he was a brother-in-law, he was an uncle, he was a cousin, he was a nephew, and he was a friend to many. We all knew him in different roles. And in the days since his passing, all of us have had many wonderful memories, I know, about the times we spent with him over the years. In fact, many of you have come to me even as late as this morning and told me about some of the things that you've experienced along the way with Frank Kennedy, and I've enjoyed hearing all of those. I don't know that we have time this morning for me to relate all of those. We'll talk about some of them. But when we get back to the funeral home, please remember to talk to the family about some of the fun experiences that you had with Frank, because I know they were fun experiences. My wife and I have thought about him a lot as we came up from Florida for this, and we've spent a lot of time with him when he was a little boy. Those are some of our fond memories of him, and we have a lot of pictures, and I brought some of them with me, and I'll have them at the funeral home to share if anybody would like to see Frank in his little military uniforms and other things as we came along the way. But we remembered him as a little boy, and we've remembered him through his school years, culminating in his graduation from Mountain Brook High School, soon to be followed by a young man sitting here on the front row tomorrow night, and also his graduation from Samford University. And of course, we followed his career at Lazy Boy for a long time, and we've just known what he was up to. But at the same time, I have to tell you that it's been a long time since I have spent some quality time with Frank. And the last time I actually saw him was last September when we buried his mom right here, my sister. In fact, I brought with me a picture that my wife took that day, right back there about where that tree is. And this is the last picture I have of he and I together. This will be at the funeral home if anybody would like to see it. And neither one of us knew this picture was being taken. We just were standing there talking. But I'll always treasure this picture. I've got a lot of great pictures of him when he was a little boy, where I really spent a lot of time with him. But I'll treasure this picture because this was a difficult day for him, and I was glad to be asked to be here with him. Now then, I remember at that service for my sister, I told one of my favorite stories about little Frank when he was a little boy, about 3 years old. This is the story that my wife and I remember a lot, and we like to tell the story of it. And I couldn't find a picture of it, unfortunately, but for those of you who were here, and there are many of you that were not here in September, the story went like this. Frank was about 3 years old, and Nikki and I would come up for Christmas. This is before we had any children. We would come up for Christmas to be with my mother, Mia, who's buried right behind me. And on this particular Christmas, we got there about 3, maybe 4 days before Christmas Day. And when we got there, my sister was in a panic. And she said, "Little Frank has just told me what he wants Santa Claus to bring him for Christmas. And it's a game called Creepy Crawler. Creepy Crawler, I think it was." And she said, "This is the most popular game for this Christmas season, and I haven't been able to find one anywhere." So I was assigned the task of finding a creepy crawler game, live or die, you know. I called every store in town. I went to every big, little, every store I could find. All of them were sold out. And I thought I'd failed in my mission and we were going to have a very unpleasant Christmas, until I ran into my aunt. Amy Marks. And Amy said, one of my boys already has one of those creepy crawler games. He's had it for a while, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind parting with it. And so, Woody, Boyd, David, I don't know which one of you had to make the ultimate sacrifice that year. But by virtue of the fact that one of you gave up the game, and even though the box was kind of beat up, and when you opened the game there was a mold in there to pour the goop in to make the little creepy crawlers, and there was still some goop in some of the holes. When little Frank opened that thing on Christmas morning, he didn't see the beat up box. He didn't notice the stains or whatever inside. He just knew it was a creepy crawler game, and he was just overcome. And the look on his face that Christmas morning will always be a look that I'll remember in my mind as long as I live. He was, of course, we all know that he was one of the cutest little boys that ever lived. But that's one of the memories that I remember because of the fact that he had such a good Christmas. Now, during the growing up years, I have to tell you that I was away more than I was here, a lot more. And there were many years that I didn't see him. I mean, many at a time. I had moved to Florida. I was trying to start my career down there. And so I only came back occasionally for visits, and usually I came back to visit my mother, Mia, who's buried right over there. And we came at Christmas a lot, Thanksgiving, sometimes for her birthday in September. But I remember a particular Thanksgiving when I came to see my mom. And when I got to the house and opened the door, I noted a change in my mother. She was wearing a University of Alabama football jersey. And, you know, it's funny, I didn't remember her being interested in football when I was growing up as a kid. But she and Frank had developed this relationship. And all of you that knew Frank Kennedy know that he's probably the greatest Alabama football fan that ever was. And so he and my mom were that way, and she was telling me about how nice it was for him to come over and sit through the game with her, always had her in the jersey, and that she felt like she was included in his life, which was a very important thing for her, because she dearly loved him. And I thought about that, and I thought there's nothing better for me than to know that my mother and my nephew have grown so close. And it was a wonderful experience for her. They had a special relationship that lasted until the day she died. And I know how many times he talked to her over the phone and from Mobile, and how many times he came to see her and visit her. And her life was always uplifted because of the fact that he came and was a part of it. Now, I've thought about this, and I think it's very fitting, and I'm saying this seriously, not to be funny, but I think it's very fitting that the #1 Alabama fan that's ever lived is going to be buried in very close proximity to the greatest coach Alabama ever had, Bear Bryant, who's about 100 yards away.
He's up there talking.
Right down the line. That's right. They're probably talking. Now, one of the things you got to remember, anytime you come by this cemetery on a football day, and you pass Bear Bryant's grave, you're going to see some Alabama pom-poms, and you'll see a saying like this with the program on it for that day. Somebody, Bear died in the 80s, somebody is still remembering him. So I think that instead of flowers out here sometime, some of you guys that come to visit might bring an Alabama program or a pom-pom or something to stick right up here where his grave is. When I read the obituary for Frank, I saw that instead of memorials, we were all asked to make donations to our nearest animal rescue operation. And quite frankly, I guess I never knew that Frank was so interested in animals. I really hadn't thought about that too much. But I have learned since then that he was. And his love for animals is told in many stories, but the one I like the best is the one that's called The Story of the Beaver. And I don't know if any of you have heard this. There are some people here in the audience who were present at the time. But anyway, Frank and his two friends, Scuba and Steve. Here's Scuba. I don't know that I know Steve.
Right here.
Okay, that's Steve.
That's Scuba.
I was going to say, that's Scuba. Where's Steve?
Stephen, yeah.
Stephen Statham.
Yeah, Stephen Statham. I don't think he's here.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry. I didn't want to overlook anybody. But anyway, the story as I heard it, maybe I ought to have Scuba tell it, but the story the way I heard it was that he and Frank and Steve were out in a boat on Lake Hollybrook. And while they were out there fishing and messing around, they saw this little beaver swimming right up to the boat. And the thing that was kind of interesting was the reaction was different among the people that were in the boat. Because the first thing that passed through Scuba's mind was, don't let this beaver get in the boat. He's got to be rabid, you know. He's coming right at us, you know. But Frank felt differently, and so he took off his pants. And he put them down in the water and made a little entryway for this beaver who climbed right up the pants leg into Frank's arms. And while the other two guys were going crazy, Frank cuddled this little beaver and took it home with him. Well, I say took it home. He took it to Mia's house, where everything else always ended up. He bought a little, one of these little plastic swimming pools that you have for kids for his beaver, until such time as the rescue people came and relieved him of the beaver. Then I started thinking about other things, about the relationship between wildlife and little Frank. And I remember one time in Florida, I bought him a little alligator, about this long. And back in those days, it was okay. It wasn't illegal to buy these little alligators. They had them along in stands along the way, and take them, let the winter visitors, as they came through town, buy them an alligator to take home. So I did that for Frank. But I think the one pet story that just tops them all is one time Big Frank came down to Florida to where I live, and he said, come on with me, Al. I want to go over and buy a present for little Frank. So we went over to Frierson near Lake Okeechobee, and they were selling skunks.
I remember the skunk. I remember the skunk.
Yeah, I'll have to admit they desanitized him before they sold him, but he came. There were a couple of them, right? So he was a person that was sensitive to animals, and that part I had forgotten about. Frank was a good-looking kid, a real people person. Everyone who knew him immediately liked him. More so the female people than the male people, but everybody liked him. And his dad told me a story this morning when Big Frank used to have a boat on Lake Logan Martin, and is that the right lake? And the boat was there, and he and little Frank were going to take a little boat ride later, but Big Frank hadn't gotten there yet. So apparently little Frank went by the sorority house and wanted to know if there were any girls that'd like to go boating with him that afternoon. And by the time Big Frank got to the lake, his boat was almost sinking because of the number of girls that were on that boat, more than the boat was supposed to carry. But anyway, he was a good-looking kid, he was a good guy, and he had such a great personality. That's why I think he did so well as a salesman down in Mobile for Lazy Boy in the Mobile area. Frank worked for David Marks at Lazy Boy Galleries for the better part of 25 years. And over those years, on several occasions, he won the Monsanto Award as being the top salesman in the state of Florida. And these awards were pretty nice because they got him trips to Hawaii and Greece, all kinds of good stuff. But the one trip that I thought about the most was, I don't know whether it was the first one or the second, because it was years ago, but it was early on. And it was always a trip for two. And he was single, so everybody was wondering who he would be taking with him on some of these trips. But on the first trip where he took a female, he took his sister Kathy. Not because anybody told him he should, not that anybody told him they thought it would be a good idea. He did it because he wanted to. And I know that you'll always remember that trip, and it'll be in your mind until your days are up. But anyway, he was a good salesman. And I don't know how many pieces of furniture you need to sell, Lazy Boy, to win that award, but that's a pretty substantial award. So I know he was doing well. But Frank had, as we all know, some difficulties from time to time while he was in Mobile. And I want to take this opportunity publicly to thank David on behalf of the family. I want to thank you that you not only provided employment for him for the better part of 25 years, but for a lot of that time you provided him both a home, your home, to stay in, and you provided him a family in Mobile. And for that we are all of the family, are very grateful, and we thank you. Now, I have to admit that there's only one time in all those years that I visited Frank in Mobile. Usually the only time I saw him was when I was up here in Birmingham. But I had a case that involved a key witness who moved to Mobile. And I was from Fort Myers, way down in southwest Florida. And I had to come up to Mobile to take this deposition. And I stayed with him. And he and I went out to dinner that night. And during the course of that dinner, we had a long conversation. Frank let his hair down and told me about the disease that he was having difficulty coping with. And he talked about the struggle that he had in his life. But then, as Frank would, in the middle of that conversation, he told me about his faith in God. And he told me about his belief in the Lord Jesus Christ. And he said, I never would be able to make it if I didn't have the support that I received from the Lord. There were other times later when he was at a rehab place out of state. I don't remember where, but I remember it was, I don't know, up north somewhere. I don't even remember where now. But he called me one night. We had the same kind of conversation. And he was saying, Uncle Al, I fell off the wagon again, and I'm now trying to get back where I need to be. And he said, this is a very difficult thing that I'm battling here. But he did say that the only reason why he thought he could be sustained to cope, I guess is the best word, with his disease was his faith in the Lord and the fact that the Lord always sustained him. And so we've had that conversation, and I know that many of you probably have had that conversation with him as well. But I do think that it is obvious that he had most of his adult life a great struggle with a very, very difficult disease. And I know that with the help of the Lord, every time he fell, every time he stumbled, he was helped back on his feet again by whoever the Lord put down, put in front of him to help him get up again. And many of you are those people who have helped him get up time and again. So I look at that, and I know that many of you had probably the same conversations with him. But from that time to the time that I just told you about, until the end of Frank's life, there was just an ongoing battle that Frank had to battle with. And we had this conversation over and over. But since every time we had the conversation, he wanted to talk about his faith, he strengthened my faith because of his faith. And he encouraged me in my faith because of his faith. He wasn't a perfect person. He fell a lot of times along life's way, stumbled and fell. But he always told me that the Lord always found somebody to pick him up. And he was always willing and ready to be picked up and to go on with life. And so, for that reason, for his testimony to me, I am absolutely certain this morning as we stand here that he is now with the Lord and that I will see him again. And I know that you feel the same way. In the final weeks of his life, Frank was unable to effectively communicate. However, there were many people who visited his bedside in Mobile. His father and his Mobile family, as I'm now calling him. However, the Lord needed Frank to have somebody to help sustain him during those difficult days. And so I believe the Lord sustained him through an angel. And the angel was named Debbie, because she was there the entire time. And I talked to her almost every night. I talked to Big Frank as well. But I talked to her every night, and she was the one who was trying to figure out how to get little Frank the best possible medical care he could find. And she was battling with a hospital that wanted him out. It was expensive. And she was having trouble with nursing homes that wouldn't take him, and rehab places the same way. And she fought a fight that I know he was aware of, because a lot of the conversations took place in the room in the hospital where he was. And I know that he knew that she was doing everything to provide for him. One day, when Debbie was not in Mobile, she went home sometime for a day or so, and Big Frank was always there to take her place and to be there for little Frank. Big Frank told me that on one of these days, there was no movement. Little Frank just was there in the bed. He didn't twitch his eyes, he didn't move, he didn't do anything. all day long. And at the end of the day, because as you know, you can't stay in the intensive care. Well, you can't stay in the intensive care unit. Parents can't, or family, for more than an hour and a half. So at the end of this day, Big Frank was going to have to leave. And as he got up and started to walk out the door, with his son not having moved or done anything all day long, with his back to him, he heard audibly the word, Debbie. And he turned around and started back to the bed, and once again he audibly heard Frank say, Debbie. He knew, little Frank knew, that you were out doing what you could to try to help him find the best medical care possible. There were other people involved down there that were involved, and the last 24 hours of Frank's life were probably the most meaningful of the 3-week period or month period that he was there. Before leaving Mobile, his Mobile family gathered at his bedside. Not only David, but Dory. I don't know Dory, she's here or not. Where's Dory? Dory, I've heard many wonderful things about your visits. Dory works apparently at the Lazy Boy store. She knew Frank well, and I've heard so many things about your visit there and how obvious it was, because there were times where he was able to communicate in different ways, that he knew you were there. He knew that you were coming through. So there was Dory, then Tara. There's Tara. I met these two. Same thing with Tara. And Matt. Is Matt around? There's Matt back by the tree. Matt, I know you were there. And Nikki. There's Nikki. All right, there they all are. I just have not met them or even seen them. It's good to see you. We appreciate what you guys did for your friend and our relative. They told him how much they loved him. And David even gave him an autographed football signed by Coach Saban. And I'm told that there were many signs that Frank was aware of what was happening that day, because he tried to grip the ball. And so that was a good final ending to the Mobile family's relationship with Frank in that hospital, because then he had to be transported to Birmingham. And after a long ambulance ride to Birmingham, he was placed in a nursing home here. And a very short period of time in there, he started failing. And so they called 911, and he was taken to the hospital. And when he got to the hospital, the doctor told Debbie to assemble the family, as he thought he wouldn't last long. And it was at that time that the Birmingham family surrounded his bed, his dad, his stepmother, his 2 sisters, his brother. They were all there for several hours, telling him of their love for him. And when he passed, he told him, his 2 sisters were holding his hands. I know he knew that they were present, and I know that he felt the support from both the Mobile family and the Birmingham family in his final days. Frank is now in a place where there is no more suffering, no more sorrow, no more pain, and no more death. And you know, even though it's difficult, we need to be happy for him. He's where he wants to be and where he needs to be and where I hope to be someday, and you too. So I know that it's tough for us. We grieve because we can't see him, but we will see him again. And for all of you who have been supportive of him in his ongoing battle with the disease, and particularly in his final days, on behalf of the family, thank you. All right, we move out of the way, and now we'll have